So welcome back to another Half and Half Scarf Football podcast with me, Nick, and my mate Dom. We're on already. We're going to be on episode 24 today, which is essentially a long way further down the road than we ever thought we might get to, but we've got plenty of subjects still to talk about. And we're going to talk today about, is it a derby or just a bit of rivalry? I'm going to ask you to decide, but be prepared for some challenging thoughts and ideas. It's something that I think Dom and I don't always agree on this one. So we're going to work out whether we think derbies are overhyped, overblown, or whether derbies are things that are of interest to the non-supporter of either club. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my mate Dom on a subject that, you know, you're an Evertonian and a Middlesbrough fan. I'm going to be controversial and say that Everton's only derby is Liverpool. Liverpool's derby with Man United is not a derby. And Middlesbrough don't have a derby because geographically we're isolated, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So welcome, Dom. We'll do the shirt thing first. That's got a lot going on, that one, mate.
Yeah, hey mate. I can't believe it's episode 24, Andy. Can't believe it's 24, mate. Unbelievable. So yeah, really chuffed with that. And like you said, mate, we've got plenty more subject matters to cover. So we'll be here for a long, long time to come. But yes,
Yeah, sorry, folks. We will be, yes.
we will be. Yeah. But I put this on just before, mate, and suddenly realised myself it's like got the biggest badge in the world. It's this is the 2011-12 Everton home kit, Le Coq Sportif, who are now sadly no longer in business. I'm sure someone will resurrect them in the future. This was a big fan favourite, this one. I liked it. It's very simple, very blue, and a little bit of yellow. We have a little bit of yellow in our kits every now and again. But you're right. I was looking at it and thinking, Jesus, look at the size of that badge. It's like going back to the old 1950s and stuff, isn't it, mate, when it was just huge, huge badges and nothing else.
Well, we're okay. We're okay to do this, Tom, because you've done it to me a couple of times. I think it's shit and I hate it, but never mind. That's just moving on. You got me a couple of times on. You know, thanks for wearing that shirt,
Fair
Nick. I
dues,
think it's
mate.
awful.
Fair dues.
Fair
Yeah.
dues. That's hideous. Right,
Yeah.
moving on. I'm wearing Boro's current away shirt on the basis of just in homage to the next two games we've got. We're recording this on Sunday, the 30th of November. Our next two games are away at Hull and away at Charlton. We've already touched on fixture list disgrace. Charlton's on a Tuesday night in South London, so I can't go to that. I'll be at Hull on Friday, but I'm wearing the away shirt on homage to the fact we've got two away games. But enough of that, because people who are listening are turning off in droves. Derby or not a derby or bit of rivalry. Let's discuss really. The reason the timing for this is now is it was inspired by the Steel City Derby. For those who don't know, is Sheffield, which was last weekend, and I class that as a proper derby in terms of, you know, two big clubs in one city with a bit of rivalry. Weirdly, they both call each other pigs, which is a very strange thing. If you're going to come up with an insult, come up with one that's not the same as the insult that they give you. But I find that very strange. We also had Arsenal Spurs last weekend, which wasn't much of a game. If you're a Spurs fan, it was an absolute shocker. And today, as we record this afternoon, Chelsea Arsenal. But more on that today, more on that game later on as to whether I think it's a derby or not. And London's a very strange kind of one in terms of derby or rivalry or geography or whatever it might be. But you want to start with a bit of a history lesson, don't you, Dom?
Yeah, first derby ever played. It was Hallam FC versus Sheffield FC in December 1860, which would make sense bearing in mind the first professional club was Sheffield all the way back in the 1800s. So that was the first derby ever played, everybody. So there's a bit of a history lesson for you.
Do you think it was? Do you think it was bitter? Do you think it was? Do you think there was a few steel toe cap boots left in? Do you think there was a bit of fighting on the terraces? How do you think it might have gone in 1870 odd?
Yeah, I reckon there might have been a bit of that. Yeah, maybes. I don't want to kind of, promote that there might have been some, violence and fisticuffs, mate. But I bet it was. I bet there was some friendly words spoken between the two. Put it that way. Yeah,
feisty might be the word.
That's the word, mate. Feisty. Yeah.
Well, okay, my thoughts on a derby. We'll talk about geography shortly. But I think if you're a proper fan of a club and you have a genuine derby, it's the first fixture you look for when the fixtures come out in June or July, and it's the one that you look forward to home and away, and it's the one that gets the tingle going on your sort of your skin when you're at the game, and you're desperate to win, or certainly desperate not to lose if it's the away game or the away version of that. But I'm controversial in the fact that I think genuinely, first of all, derbies are geographic, and secondly, as a club, you can only have one derby. I think you can only have one because if you're in London, where there's 8 or 9 teams and six or so in the Premier League, you can't have it always. They can't, the classed as derbies by lazy Sky TV and TNT and all that to hype them up and build them up. But let's be fair. Does anyone really give a shit about Tottenham versus Fulham last night? Not really. Does anyone care about sort of West Ham versus Chelsea? Not really, unless you support those clubs. For me, the big derby in London, the one that outsiders would probably look at the fixture list and think, oh, I might watch that on Super Sunday, would definitely be the North London derby because of the history, etc. If you're Chelsea, make a choice. You can't have Tottenham because Tottenham have already got Arsenal. But I don't know if Fulham geographically are your local derby, but Chelsea Fulham, not going to get me out my seat, not going to get me watching on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What's your thoughts on? We'll talk about London first, and then I'll give you a list of some what I call proper "how's your mother" derbies, as I would call them.
Yeah.
What's your view on London, Dom?
Um, I'm pretty much with you, mate, to be honest. And I'd be really interested to see what some of our listeners make of this. Because if you're London based and you support a London team, like Nick said, you might have a very different viewpoint on it and be more passionate about it. But I think where it blurs the lines in London for me is there's so many teams and so many teams in geographical areas that there's not a standout one, is there? If you start looking I scrolled through before we started this pod, and you've got so many connotations in either East London, South London, North London, West London. You haven't got a single one, and not one of them stood up for me as going, wow, that's a really interesting one. That's a really good one. I think the only one for me that popped out, and people will probably disagree, but I thought from an East London point of view, not that they'd rarely play each other, but back in the day they would have done a few in the 70s and stuff. Orient v West Ham, that would be a really good East London derby if ever that came around again. But I think, like you said, there's so many teams that you end up thinking, oh, well, are they derbies? Because they've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 teams in each area that they could all basically say that's a derby. At least the North London one is, they're literally a stone's throw from each other. They are in the right geographical area, 2 big teams, and it is a proper derby. And it is the only one of the London ones that I would probably say, yes, that's a proper derby.
The one that's on today, I will watch because it's an interesting game of football. It's obviously Chelsea hosting Arsenal at Stamford Bridge. But geographically, there's probably 3 or 4 clubs between the two, if you're going through London to get from one to the other. So it isn't a derby. It's a London inverted commas derby, but it's a big rivalry, and I'm interested in it as a spectacle of football because Arsenal have been great to watch this season. I think Chelsea are a really interesting young club, and young players and all that kind of. Will they stand up to the rigors of Arsenal's kind of aerial assault from, I guess, long throws and corners and that kind of thing? But Sky hype it up as a derby. Chelsea fans, I know Jason Cundy's probably, if he ever listened to this, he's probably pulling his hair out what's left of it now because he thinks Chelsea the centre of the universe. I mean, to be fair, yeah, Cundy's slightly misspelt, isn't it, to be fair? On that basis, it's not a derby for me because the North London derby is the one. Chelsea can have Fulham, but nobody cares. And London, I'll talk about Argentina later on, Buenos Aires being another similar example of that. I don't know what people think. West Ham hate Millwall and Millwall hate West Ham, but they're not even in the same area, are they?
They're not, and I was looking at this as well. It's known as I don't know if it still is, but it was historically known as the Dockers Derby, Millwall West Ham.
Right.
So that's the kind of connection they give it. But does that really make it a derby? Well, no. It's not really a derby as such. It's that's the thing you get, isn't it? You can kind of invent all kinds of different derbies due to history, rivalries, a sort of geographical link. When you look online, mate, you've got all sorts like the M1 derby, Luton Watford, the M40 derby, Oxford Wickham, M4, Reading v Swindon, Thames Valley, Oxford v Reading. Are you going a bit far there? I think maybe if you are, it's stretching the Derby bit of the
Well,
conversation.
you mentioned Oxford and Reading a couple of times there. They can't have, for me, in
You
my
can't have more than one, can you? No,
my
no.
rule of thumb. So I've got a list. I'll read through. It'll take a little minute or two. I've got the Steel City Derby, obviously Sheffield Wednesday United. I've got
Yeah,
Derby Forest. I've got Liverpool Everton, Sunderland Newcastle. That's a biggie, and that's the reason Boro don't have a derby, because Sunderland's derby is with Newcastle, quite rightly. The Manchester Derby, Celtic Rangers, Hearts Hibs, Dundee versus Dundee United, Cardiff Swansea. Pompey versus Southampton, Burnley Blackburn, Ipswich Norwich, Watford Luton, Barnsley Rotherham, which I'm sorry, Simon Jennison and Michelle listening. I know that you would think that your biggest game, if you play them, is Sheffield Wednesday because of your historical dislike for them. But geographically, Barnsley Rotherham, I'm sorry, it doesn't have the same ring about it, Simon and Michelle, but Barnsley Rotherham is probably
it's your
your local
Derby. Yeah,
derby. Yeah. Plymouth Exeter, Swindon Oxford, not Oxford versus any bugger else down the M40. And I've got Stoke and Port Vale, although the last two, Swindon Oxford and Port Vale and Stoke, are rarely played. So I've got a list there of what I class as proper derbies. And if you're listed in there, you can't have another one. You can't say Forest and Leicester is one because Forest have got Derby. So, for example, I'm going to come up with clubs later on who haven't got a Derby as far as I can see. But they're an interesting concept for me because they're not always equally balanced, are they? Over the years, and I hate to say this to a man wearing an Everton shirt, Liverpool have been much more successful in more recent
oh,
history
yeah,
than Everton.
yeah.
So Liverpool fans have probably looked to the Man United fixture rather than the Everton fixture. But I guarantee Evertonians have looked at the Liverpool fixture first and thought, when do we play them buggers home and away? Same with Man City when they were crap. Man United didn't care about Man City at all. But then, Man City fans were desperate to beat Man United. So I think when it's imbalanced a little bit, it goes out of sequence. It goes out of sync a little bit. But a derby for me is geographical, historic, and it's based on something. It's not based on a road name, by the way. What's your view on that kind of approach? As an
Yeah.
Evertonian, am I right with that assumption about Liverpool giving it less consideration in the years when Liverpool and Man United were more rivals than perhaps they are now?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of Liverpool fans who, whether they actually mean it or whether they're just trying to say it to be derogatory, as if it doesn't mean anything, that they try and make out that that and the Man United game is more important. It may be to some extent, but let me assure you, when it comes around, they absolutely want to win it, and it is important because it's bragging rights. And yeah, over recent years, they've done a lot better than we have. I mean, our record in the derby, particularly at home, is really, really painful. So
Mm.
it's bleak reading for us. I have to say, maybe it's because I'm Borough first and then Everton. It's not the first fixture I look for when I see it. I just generally look for the fixtures in general and see which ones pop out in terms of calendar wise and how I'm planning my football
Mm.
taking. Um, I don't really look at it straight away. No, I honestly don't. It's not. It is important when it comes round. I love the day. They never usually end well, but it's. I'd say it's just my personal opinion is I'd say it's just as important to Liverpool fans. Some of them I think try and deny it and say, "Oh, it's nothing to us. It's not interesting." Well, I think you're lying because it is. Let's face it,
Mm.
it is.
Yeah.
And whether you try and make out that the Liverpool Man United one is more important, fine. I don't believe you for a minute. I think back in when both were really in their pomp, it definitely had a lot more gravity. It still has gravitas now, but I think it had a lot more then when both teams were seriously on it. And it is
Mm.
a really good game, but it's not a derby. And I think you always want to beat your locals. So yeah, I'd agree because you could also argue that, say, Tranmere suddenly became, a really big team and was suddenly in the Premier League. Would that be a derby? Well, actually, no, it's not because Everton and Liverpool are both in Liverpool. Tranmere's on the Wirral, so you could say it's near, but it's not really technically a derby. It's like people watching this might say, well, actually, I disagree because you've got the Tees Weir derby, which is Middlesbrough Sunderland, and you've got the Tyne Tees derby, which is Newcastle Middlesbrough, but they're not true derbies for me.
No, let me pick this up. Newcastle Sunderland is a derby because there's 8 miles between them.
Yeah,
Okay, they're from different cities, but there's 8 miles between them, and there's bitter history or whatever.
yeah,
The Tees Weir derby is a Tees Weir rivalry for me. Borough fans
yeah.
Boro fans, will often say it's a derby. Sunderland fans always say it's not a derby unless they win. When they win it, suddenly they're quite happy to call it. We just won the local derby. In some respects, that's just a bit of banter. But as a long-standing card-carrying Middlesbrough fan, we haven't got a derby. But the first fixtures I look for last season, when Sunderland and Leeds were both in the same division as us, I look for Leeds. I look for Sunderland, mainly because historically there's a rivalry, a Boro rivalry with Leeds. Leeds couldn't care less about Boro, by the way, and I totally get that. Leeds
Yeah,
fans
I get
listening
that.
go, we don't care about Boro. We're more bothered about, Man United or Sheffield United or whoever it
Yeah,
might be.
I
And
understand
by
that.
the way, Leeds' derby, Bradford City, and that never happens either. So Leeds don't have a really big derby, irrespective of who they think their rivals are. They hate Man United, but that's just a rivalry. Boro don't have a derby with Leeds. Boro don't have a rivalry, a derby with Sunderland. Just have a rivalry. Boro's nearest game this season is either Hull or Blackburn Rovers. That's none of them. They don't constitute anything geographically, do they? You know what I mean?
No,
I live in York, and I'm as close to Hull as I am to Middlesbrough. But that's just a convenient away game to me.
yeah,
You can't force a rivalry on something just because you got no one else, can you? You know what I mean?
I agree. For me, all those games you described there, I don't treat them as derbies. I just treat them as rivalries. And in some respects, you could say that, well, maybe that is more important to you because you enjoy it more. And that's
Yeah.
maybe where Liverpool fans might have a counter argument and say, well, we think that is the bigger game, Liverpool United, and we enjoy it more, and it's more important to us. Therefore, it has more significance.
Hmm.
And maybe that is the case. Um, but I
What do
don't
you
buy.
think? What do you think? What do you think of Man City then? Because Man City's derby always has to be Man United. But
Mm,
um, they were crap for years, weren't they? And Man United probably didn't give them any due credence. And if they lost to Man City, you'd be like, okay, so what? Man City, it would have been their highlight of the season at certain times because they were in the mire for a long time. Beating Man United when they were in the mire would have been like a proper highlight. But
yeah,
now City look at it, and I'm sure City over very recent years have regarded a more important game as being Liverpool rather than Man United, who've been
yeah,
in the doldrums. But to City fans, who do they want to beat more? Do they want to beat Man United? Do they want to beat Liverpool? And I don't know what the answer to that is. If you're a City fan listening, let me know. And Liverpool fans, your
yeah.
rivalry in Manchester shifted from red to blue, but I still think the red half of Manchester is the one that you'd like to win more because of the history. And I don't know if I'm right on that, but you can't have each other as a derby because geographically you're not in the same area and they've already got one each. Man City, Man United derby, Liverpool, Everton derby, you can't have anyone else. But I wonder what the fans think of the recent shift in power, to Man City, away from Man United, and who they see as most important to beat.
I agree, and I think it does. I think it will swing and change depending on how the clubs are doing at any given time.
Mm,
I was a student in Manchester and lived there afterwards as well. Lived there for 7 years, and when I was there, that was when Man United were absolutely in their pomp. That's when they won the Premier League. And won the league game for the first time in 20 odd years, and
mm.
the team they had was just something else. And it also coincided with when Man City were in free fall and went down to the old third division. So yeah, I think going back there, I'm sure Man United would have still loved beating Man City, and Man City beating Man United would have been when they were in the same league would have been really important to them. Um, Now, yeah, you can see how it evolves and changes. I would probably agree. Is that as important? I'm sure when the game comes round, both sets of fans desperately want to beat each other for bragging rights. I think that's always going to be the core of it and the gut of it.
Mm.
But in terms of where you're sitting in actual what it means in terms of league, etc., yeah, I'd probably say at the moment, Man City Liverpool is probably more up there for Man City fans.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it does all depend on what that club's situation is at that time and who their nearest rivals are in terms of potentially winning something or not winning something. But I just think there's something really special about a derby. It's when the day comes round, whether you're being dismissive and derogatory and saying it's not important to us, you're trying to be the bigger club, etc. I think when it really comes down to it, when you're watching it, especially if you're actually there, it does mean something. It means a lot. It really
There's a
does.
there's a tingle, isn't there? There's a
Of
difference.
course there is. Of course
There's
there is.
something in the air. There's more police presence. There's usually, a lot more kind of tension in a good way. And as I said earlier, we have rivalries at Middlesbrough rather than derbies. But when we played Leeds at the Riverside, where we've not got a great record, but we've got a slightly better record than Elland Road, I have goosebumps for 90 minutes because I'm thinking to myself, what if, or maybe, and same at Sunderland, went to Sunderland a couple of seasons ago and won 4-0 away. And that was just a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant day out.
Yeah.
We went to Oxford last season and won 6-2 away. I'm telling you now, didn't feel anywhere near the 4-0 away at Sunderland, 6-2 away at Oxford. Just doesn't feel the same because the rivalry's there, but the derby isn't. Now, on the list of derbies, I'm going to go through a couple, and I think there's a bit of history there. When Derby and Forest were in the same division, and they've spent a long time in the Championship, Forest, in their 20 years or whatever, and they played Derby twice a season for a long time. That's a feisty piece of it. That's a feisty affair. When you used to watch that it was often a Sunday lunchtime, 12 o'clock kickoff, and I'd try and catch a game like that because I'd think to myself, there's derbies usually involve red cards, lots of bookings, often, chaotic games, aren't there, in terms of, managers getting sent off.
Usually.
That's the word. That's the word.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they end up just being really boring, and the team you think is going to win steamrolls the opposition. But every now and again, and generally, there's always a bit of unpredictability. It's like last season at Goodison when we got the last second equaliser to make it 2-2 when Liverpool were already bragging about they won the league at Goodison Park when they hadn't, because they haven't got a sense of humour and doesn't really work like that. Because the previous season we'd said you lost the league at Goodison Park, and they technically had lost it when we beat them. They didn't win the league at Goodison Park last season, but Liverpool fans, they always kind of, they just haven't got a sense of humour. It's a bit like when we have the banner saying we built this city from 1878. It was true because we did. And they say we made this city. It's like, well, what does that actually mean? It doesn't mean anything. You didn't make anything. So they just don't get it, and they don't have any. I mean, it's a bit like, brief side topic is they've lost 9 out of 12 and they're literally jumping off bridges, and it's the end of the world. It's like, seriously, you wouldn't know how to cope with watching really terrible football season in, season out. Most of their fans would probably pack up and walk away and take their deck.
Entitled.
Go and support the next upcoming team that's going to be, winning a trophy. So it's like, please, it's the free fall is hysterical on local news, and all these podcasters literally, screaming blue murder and crying their eyes out. It's like, oh my God, you just don't know the half of it. You don't know you're born.
No.
So I think, on Derby Day, when we got that last minute equaliser, it was pride as well. And if people want to dismiss that and say it's sad, well, fine. What that also meant was, Liverpool hadn't won more derbies at Goodison, which is it is important in bragging rights and things like that. It also meant that the last derby at Goodison was something spectacular, and yet people sadly still walked out before the end of the game and missed the finale. And their fans were good. Yeah, and their fans and their team were gutted and really pissed off that we've got an equaliser. And I don't care if you come out of the class and you think you'd won. It's like, it's not about that. It's just literally about the fact that you didn't win, and the manner of which we got the draw, which we thoroughly deserved, by the way. Yeah. So I think on the day, I think it does produce something, or can produce something special. They are games that you love to be there. You want to be involved in it. As a neutral, you really enjoy watching them. I think you picked
Can I stop you there? That's a really important point for me, Dom. As a neutral, would you be attracted to watching the game? I'm not saying Man City bore me anyway, to be fair. But Man City, Liverpool were always decent games. But Man City, Man United, as a derby, for me, it's their derby. I'm not that interested. I like a big game. I'm not that bothered about a derby, but for the fans, it's got bragging. You used the word bragging rights, didn't you, really? And there's a few on that list. Go on, you're going to mention a few on the list there that you said. There's a few on that list.
Interestingly, I was just going to say, you mentioned about Derby Notts Forest, which is a well-known derby, and it is good. But, I think you can also, and just to cover people who might be screaming at us, you've got to remember as well that the absolute derby in terms of Forest is Notts County. I mean, their grounds are literally next to each other. You couldn't get more geographically closer than. In fact, I think there's no two grounds that are closer together than Notts County and Notts Forest. You know,
Don't don't
please,
don't
please
I,
tell me.
don't call them Notts Forest. They go apeshit if you call them Notts
Nottingham
Forest.
Forest, Nottingham
You,
Forest, and Notts. Yeah, sorry, everyone. Yes, you're quite right. But that is yeah, because I'm kind of making out their link to Notts that way. But that is a proper derby. But sadly, they've been in different divisions for the best part of 30 odd years. So
yeah,
you know that's
yeah.
almost like a forgotten derby. But if Notts County was suddenly resurrected, you know, like everyone thought they would be 12 years ago, when you
Ah,
know Ericsson was involved and those bogus owners and stuff, which was a real shame because the intention was there, but sadly it was a hoax. But if they suddenly got back to being on the level of Nottingham Forest, not Notts Forest, Nottingham Forest, that would probably be a bigger derby than
yeah.
Nottingham and Derby. But interestingly, it'd be nice to see, I'd really be interested to see what Nottingham Forest fans and Derby fans felt about that. Nottingham Forest fans might say, well, we still think Derby is the bigger game for us.
Hmm.
But
More
really, in terms
history.
of if you're going on what we're saying and how we're basing it, then geographically, you'd have to say Nottingham Forest, Notts County is the
Yeah.
ultimate one because they are
To be
literally
honest, when
separated by what? The Trent? I think that's literally in the middle of it. That's it, isn't it?
yeah, when I was putting the list together, I never even considered that because it's so rare. I mean, I put Stoke Port Vale because Stoke haven't got a derby otherwise, and
Yeah.
that jumped out to me. The ones I look at here is you look at things like Ipswich Norwich, and
Yeah.
Ipswich beat Norwich this season for the first time in 15 attempts. And honestly, they celebrated that like they'd won the FA Cup final, and quite rightly,
Yeah.
because that's not just a derby; it's bitter. It's a bitter rivalry,
Yeah.
as a derby often could and should be. And you look at it and you think, you know, for those involved, and I was drawn to watch that on TV because I thought to myself, oh, this might be tasty. A derby's usually got tastiness attached to it for me. So Burnley Blackburn, these are the kind of fixtures, and Southampton and Portsmouth where you have to be bussed in. And the worst one for that, I think, is the South Wales derby, Cardiff Swansea. If you're a Swansea fan, you're playing away at Cardiff. Even if you live in Cardiff, you have to go to Swansea to get a bus to go back to the game because they won't give you open tickets for the fear of, you know, retribution. Same with Burnley, Blackburn, and same, I guess, with Portsmouth and Southampton to some extent. So when all that's going on behind the scenes, it's you're drawn to the tastiness on the pitch, aren't you? Although
Yeah.
I will say that Southampton versus Portsmouth this year was an absolute disgrace of a game at 0-0. It was just an aberration of a game of football. They really poor fare. But
Yeah.
like you said, sometimes they drown each other out. Don't they? Let's go international. Let's
Yeah.
talk internationally, right? Because we're both fans who follow, you know, football outside of the UK as well, to
Mm.
some lesser or greater extent, and a lot of Sky and you know, international media, broadcast media, they'll hype up games like, you know, Barcelona and Real Madrid as you know, El Clasico, and imply that it's a derby. Nowhere near. Der Klassiker in Germany, you know, Dortmund against Bayern Munich. Jesus Christ, you couldn't be further away from each other to try.
Exactly. Yeah.
But to build them up, and I think there's been a massive blurring of the lines over recent years. If you're a football fan who has no sense of geography, I reckon you think that Barcelona and Real Madrid's a derby, or that
Well,
Bayern,
I've heard
Bayern
people
and
say that. I've actually spoken to people who have actually even said that to me and said, "Oh, well, Madrid, Barcelona, that's a derby." It's like, no, it's not. You don't understand what a derby is then because they're in completely different cities. It's not a derby; it's a rivalry, and it's only they're made into classic games because of what the rivalry is. I think broadcasters really, and in fairness, you know, Dortmund Schalke does get a good press when they're in the same league as each other and play each other, and it is given due credence. But I don't think the ones in Spain are given the same celebration. And there's some brilliant ones there. I mean, not that I care, you know, a jot about Barcelona, but Barcelona Espanyol
mm,
is you know you could argue as well Barcelona Genoa. You know, is that
Genoa,
sorry
Girona.
Girona, not Genoa, Girona. Is that I would say probably Barcelona Espanyol is probably the classic one, but
Mm,
would people argue that Barcelona Girona is one or Girona Espanyol is one? But you know, I'd be really interested to see
Hang
in
on,
terms
Dom.
of.
You wouldn't be drawn to watching it though, would you? That's the key.
No, I don't think you. I don't think you would. But then it'd be really interesting to see what, say, Girona or Espanyol fans think, and that might be a really big game on their calendar, and I bet it is because if they're competing in the same league, they'll desperately want to beat Barcelona. Everyone I speak to who supports a club in Spain, other than Madrid or Barca, they desperately want to beat them. That's one of their biggest games because they just want to put one over on these two
Yeah.
juggernauts that literally win everything and dictate everything. The only ones who ever get a vague look in now and again are Atletico Madrid. No one really else stands a chance of doing anything. So I do think maybe you're right. It's a good point you raised there. Did the media perhaps inflate and enhance and promote rivalries more than derbies? And do you know what? Is that right or wrong? It'd be hard to say. It's wrong because they are big games, but broadcasters do it because they want the revenue and the people watching the games and things like that. Whereas I think derbies should be celebrated. They're the traditions of football. Local derbies of teams in the same neighbourhoods. You absolutely want to see that. Completely want to. I want to see that more. It's look at the other ones. I mean, I wrote a few down that are exactly that. Would I rather go and see a rivalry like Barca Madrid? No, I'd much rather go and see the likes of Athletic play Sociedad or Betis play Sevilla. They're proper local rivalries, and they'd be
Yeah.
brilliant games to watch as a neutral and be in the stands watching there.
I
In
agree.
Italy, you've got, this is where I got Genoa, but look, Genoa v Sampdoria. That's a really, really big derby. Genoa, Sampdoria, a much younger club that have come along and kind of assert Genoa to some degree, and so the Genoese fans, they desperately want to win that one. It's a huge derby. Ones we and you've discussed that we'd really like to go to. Roma Lazio, massive derby. One I'd love to attend. Me and you have both said this. AC Inter, that'd be just fabulous.
I'll come to AC Inter later. I wanted to put another one in. In Italy, Torino versus Juventus. Torino never, ever, ever beat Juventus, and Juventus would probably class their game priority being AC Milan or Napoli or whatever, and ignoring inverted commas little Torino. But the day Torino beat Juventus, half the city will close and they'll be off for days, won't they? Because it's one of those. That's how important it is to the smaller club in that kind of equation.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of other things. I want to tell a story really about. I had a trip, and you've probably heard this. I had a trip to Belgrade for a conference, or some time ago, probably about 8-10 years ago. A little bit of time off in the conference schedule, and it was February, and it was their winter break, and it was -18, snow on the 10 feet deep and all that kind of thing. But I love a stadium, so I thought, right, I've got an afternoon off, so I jumped in a taxi. Worst drive of my life ever in snow. That they didn't seem to care, just a little taxi driver bombing along with packed ice. It's like, oh my god! So he took me to the Partizan Stadium, and there was a sort of side gate open. Big open bowl, 10 foot of snow banked up on a. It's one of those sort of banked stadiums. And I had a good look round, just took a few photographs, and then I walked over the road. This is why it's a real derby, Partizan and Red Star. Is Partizan are the government and army team historically of Belgrade and Serbia, and Red Star are the people's team. But their stadiums are as close as Notts County and Nottingham Forest, as close as Dundee and Dundee United. They're literally, 200-300 yards, if that, away, through lots of snaking little alleyways. And I was thinking to myself, Christ, this will be fun on Derby Day. I went to Red Star. I was trying to walk around to try and find my way in, and a guy approached me, and I said to him, I said in English, is there any way in? When he realised I was English, he said to me, what are you doing here? I said, I just like a stadium, I like the history. I've come to just, take a few photographs, have a look, and then, go back. He was the commercial director of Red Star Belgrade. He gave me an hour and a half private guided tour of the Red Star Belgrade Stadium, including their trophy room. And because I knew that they'd won the Champions League in '91, and he knew that I knew, he was like, oh my God, English is the home of football. He was so proud of his club. and he told me all the history of the, Red Star versus Partizan, and the fact that there's flares and fighting in the tunnels on the way there on match day. And that for me, I don't know if I'd be brave enough to go to one. A bit like sort of the derbies in Turkey. You'd look at it and go, they look brilliant, but I'm not sure on the day whether I'd be scared out my wits to actually attend one. But Red Star and Partizan, they've got a derby going on there because of the history of the people versus the government, or people versus the army, and it's the same in Turkey, isn't it? You look at, I was in Istanbul earlier in this year for a conference, and on the Monday night while I was at the conference, Galatasaray were playing Besiktas, and I thought, oh, I quite fancy getting a ticket for that, and I went into the city, literally outside our hotel, and the noise. This was like 2 in the afternoon, and the game didn't kick off till 7:30, 8 o'clock, and it was full of Galatasaray fans who were then going to move across the city en masse. I thought to myself, you know what? Probably don't want to go to that, because it felt there was a real undercurrent of danger.
Yeah.
But you'd be keen to watch it, although it ended up 0-0. It was apparently a bit of a crap game, but a proper derby is a proper derby, isn't it? There's a history, there's a tension. Some of the fans are bonkers, but on that basis, that's what encourages you to watch them, don't they?
Totally agree. I mean, I remember you telling me that story, and I'm the same as you. I love a stadium. I've posted it on our LinkedIn group before. Anywhere I go, I'll go and look at a stadium. If it's closed or anything, I'll look through locked gates and take pictures and walk around. I'll do it anyway. And if I can, a bit like you, if I see someone around or someone in a club shop, I'll speak to them, because you just, on the off chance that you, exactly like what happened to you, you might get shown around or they'll tell you some information. But just being around stadiums, I love. And I'd written down there Red Star and Partizan, because Red Star had a really good team. When they won the 91 European Cup, they had a belting. Everyone thought Marseille were going to blow them away, and they didn't. And it was I remember the final, it was a really boring final, and they won it 1-0, but they still won it. And nobody expected them to, but they had a really good team. Whether they've survived now in how the Champions League is set up now, but back then on pure knockout phases, they were dynamite, and they were a really, and for them, that's massive that they won the European Cup.
Yeah.
Red Star in Serbia. That would that happen now? Sadly, I don't think it would. And I actually think the powers that be don't want that either. When actually they should be wanting more of things like that. Sadly, But yeah.
But I'm a Red Star fan by nature. When I look at when they're in Europe now, I'm always looking. They're called Krasnov something or other now. I can't even pronounce what they're called now. But I always look out for their results, because the commercial director was just so kind,
so good, and so kind, and gracious, and wanting to promote their club. Things like that resonate with you as a fan as well. And no, I totally agree. And you're talking about Galatasaray. I wrote down as well. And again, people might chime in and say differently, but I believe the key one for Galatasaray is Fenerbahce. Is that's like the biggest Istanbul rivalry, or so I'm told. I mean, again, please correct us, listeners, if we're wrong, because there might be more than one, but that's the one that is usually billed as the biggest, Galatasaray Fenerbahce, and I would love to go to that. Whether I'd dare, I don't know. But if you actually got in and managed to watch that as a neutral, even if it ended up being a dour game, I think you'd be so transfixed by just the sheer passion of the fans. I mean, I remember being in Turkey on holiday once and chatting to, proper Turkish fans, and off match day, the nicest, loveliest people you ever want to meet and talk football with. But on match day, whether they turn into gremlins, I don't know. But their rivalries are something else. So it's a bit like the Celtic Rangers. Would you dare go into that one? That's a bit of a feisty one as well, in terms of on the actual match day, walking in as a neutral. Would me and you both want to go to that? That'd be fabulous as well. And
we'll come to that in a second. I want to come back to. We've done a bit of international stuff. I'll talk about, actually, while we're on the subject. If you look at Buenos Aires, a football hotbed, there's 18 clubs in Buenos Aires, right? And you mentioned earlier, I think Boca River Plate are the sort of Arsenal and Tottenham
Yeah,
version of that. That's the game that you want to watch.
yeah.
But you mentioned there's a couple of others, isn't there?
Independiente and Racing Club is quite a prominent one, which has a lot of it's has a lot of respect and rivalry, and that's a big one. You know, when you
mm,
if when I was doing some research, it's interesting when you pop up which the biggest proper derbies in these countries. That one
yeah,
does pop up as well as River Plate Boca as being one that's really heavily watched and is a big rivalry. Again, it's hard to then find. Well, okay, so that's in Buenos Aires as well. So how does the Independiente River Plate or Racing Club Boca, how does that work? They obviously don't treat each other the same as they obviously have their own set rivals with each, and maybe that is to do with what you said. It's geographic. I
yeah.
didn't do as much research to find out is that what it is. Maybe they're closer to each other, so that's their
Dis-
absolute derby within that city.
District wise, Buenos Aires is like London. London doesn't have a centre; it has a load of districts, doesn't it?
Yeah,
And like whatever. And Buenos Aires is like that. So I think it does come from district history.
districts. Yeah,
The Boca are quite close to River Plate, but not the closest, to be fair. So again, you want to watch it because it's a rivalry. You want to watch it because it's a Buenos Aires derby. But actually, there's 18 clubs in Buenos Aires. They're not all in the top division, obviously, but the vast majority of football in Argentina is centred around Buenos Aires. So they can't all be derbies, otherwise, what's the point? I think it devalues it anyway if they are. I think that,
yeah,
a derby's special for all sorts of reasons. A rivalry's special based on history, but rivalries come and go, don't they? As
yeah.
teams fade and don't fade. But you know, Stoke and
Yeah, it's
Port
a good
Vale.
one. That
Stoke and Port
it's a good
Vale.
shout. That a derby's always there, come hell or high
Yeah,
water. If you're in the same division, that derby's always there. I think the interesting point is what we were saying before. For Nottingham Forest and Notts County, that is classically their derby, but they've never played it in probably
yeah.
40 years because they've been separated for that long. And
Mm,
you'd probably say, well, when will they ever meet again? It's probably a long time off,
yeah.
really, which is a shame, but that's just how football works, isn't it? But
Mm,
so that's when things that the likes of Nottingham Forest derby come to the fore because that is probably they've played each other probably far more over
mm.
recent times.
I think Port Vale played Stoke in the League Cup or the FA Cup a long time, about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was feisty because Port Vale was so desperate. Stoke probably didn't care,
Didn't get
but
much.
Port Vale fans certainly did. I've got some. Let's coming back to the UK. I've got some teams that I don't think have a derby in my eyes geographically. Okay, and I'm going to read through them. A couple of
Mm,
controversial. And others are just geographically. And I'd like their fans who might be listening to say, hang on, Nick, you're wrong. We do have a derby, and it's with this
absolutely. Please
club.
correct
So,
us.
yeah, yeah.
That's what we want. That's I think it's good. It's a good subject this for debate in terms of people might chime in and say, no, you're wrong. There's this and there's this and there's this, and that's great. I'd like to hear people's opinions on it. So go on, mate. What were you going to say?
I'll give you my list, okay? Boro, I've mentioned we don't have a derby. Coventry, the M69 derby with Leicester. Bullshit. It's not real. You're too far away. You can't have Birmingham because they've got Villa. So Coventry don't have a derby. Their fans are desperately keen to have a rivalry with someone, though. They're desperately keen to have a rivalry with Sunderland for some reason, historically. Something to do with Jimmy Hill. And Boro and Coventry now got a bit of a rivalry going because of history recently. But that's a
Mm.
rivalry. Yeah, but Coventry, Leicester, I'm sorry, just not a derby.
Well,
If
they've
someone
got
can
West
tell...
Midlands, haven't they? West Midlands derby is classed as Villa Coventry, but again, you've got lots of like Villa Wolves, Villa Birmingham. So again, which is the most prominent? That's the thing, isn't it?
Villa have got Birmingham. Wolves have got West Brom.
West Brom, which is more probably that's probably their derby, isn't it?
Coventry have got
Absolutely.
no one. Right, anyway, derby wise. Crystal Palace Brighton, that's just bollocks. I'm sorry, I don't care. Whatever you call it, it's named after a road, isn't it? The M3 Derby or whatever. That's just bollocks. I know it historically goes back to something or other. It isn't a derby. It's never been a derby. It's a proper rivalry for some reason, based on, I do believe, an event with Alan Mullery in the 70s, 80s, whatever. I'm sorry, Crystal Palace and Brighton. Outside of you two, no one cares. I've got Bournemouth. They don't have one. Leeds, technically it's Bradford City, but Leeds fans would probably ignore that. I guarantee Bradford City, if they drew Leeds in the FA Cup, would class it as a derby and be desperate to beat them, but they don't play very often. I've got Hull, Wrexham, Lincoln, Wigan, Burton Albion, Walsall, Grimsby, Cheltenham. I don't think any of them have got a derby. If I'm wrong, Cheltenham's probably now what they call the vegan people, Forest Green,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that's like a Johnny come lately thing, isn't it? I've got most of Scotland because when you talk about Scotland, I always think about obviously Celtic Rangers, Hearts, Hibs, Dundee United. And I'm sorry, Scotland. The reason I say there's not many in Scotland is because most English fans, including myself, couldn't pick out on a map where teams like Annan Athletic are. So there might be some really good derbies in Scotland, but there's loads of teams we couldn't pick out on a map. I don't really know. I sort of roughly know where Dunfermline is, but I don't really sort of think, well, I'm desperate to watch that. So
The Fife derby, but again, you've got different connotations. So you'd have like Wraith, East Fife, or East Fife Dunfermline, or Dunfermline Cowdenbeath, because they're all Fife teams. So again, is there a true derby out of all those? Because there's a mix of teams. You've got the Inverness Caledonian Ross County. That's a derby in Scotland. St Mirren
wow.
and Greenock. That's a derby. But
St
again,
Mirren,
St
St
Mirren,
Mirren and Greenock, is
Greenock
it? Right,
Morton.
okay.
Yeah.
Wow,
Look, we have to give our Scottish fans some due credence here. And
we do.
I've got a strong Scottish family. I've always got a soft spot for Scotland.
So here's a question then. St Mirren Greenock, right? A, do their fans look for that fixture first? B, do they get a bigger attendance on those games than they would against other people?
Mm.
And C, does it really fire up the imagination for them? It certainly doesn't fire up the imagination for the neutral, I wouldn't have thought.
But if it does it for them, that's great because that's
That's
what
a
it's for.
derby.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
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 derby. Yeah. And we hope it does.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I want to finish this episode. We've been a bit controversial. London clubs, fans of London clubs, tell me who you think your derby is, or whether it's just a
Yeah, I'd be really
rivalry.
interested to see what people think on that because I'm not knocking it, by the way. I don't think Nick is either. It's just there's so many connotations. So, in your eyes, as a follower of your club, if you disagree, please post or comment and say why. I would really be interested to see why you think
Mm.
you versus whoever is a derby and why. Because there's just too many connotations to say that's the absolute one.
And here's the thing: you can't have them all. So I'm sorry, you can't. So
Yeah, you can't have them all. Yeah.
whatever Sky do to say another London derby, no, it's not. You've got a derby, one derby. Pick it. Tell me why. Tell us why. And it's the one that you look for. But for me, if you're in London and you've got all these fixtures, it's the one you look for first, home and away, and geographically it has to be close. If it's not, it's just
Yeah,
a
I agree
rivalry.
with that, and I think it's a positive not to sound too negative. I think from London's point of view, you're blessed with having lots and lots of rivalries, and I
Yeah.
think that's a really good thing. As
Mm.
a fan, that must be quite interesting to have lots of, if your clubs are in the same divisions, obviously, but probably have lots of games that you consider really good rivals, like Chelsea Arsenal, for example. So
Yeah.
you might have lots of games that you get really up for because they mean more to you, whereas other
Mm.
people might just have you know the odd one or not many based on where you are at any given time. Like for example, us this season, mate, Middlesbrough, we haven't really got one, have we? So
No, no,
it's
absolutely not.
we're missing the likes of the Leeds games, Sunderland games, Newcastle for years now, and things like that. So yeah.
Mm. Okay. Last thing I want to ask you. Well, I'm looking forward to Sunderland Newcastle derby in a couple of
I
weeks.
am.
As a
Yeah, yeah.
neutral, I'm definitely going to be watching that. I think Sunderland have come out of the blocks really well. Currently,
Look,
the
it's a really
fourth in
good
the
game.
table.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good game. And the reason it's a good game to the neutral is because it's a derby with the rivalry. The two are intrinsic. So, if Port Vale draws Stoke in the FA Cup third round, I'm less likely to watch that, is what I'm trying to say, without being disrespectful to either Port Vale or Stoke. So, I'm going to watch Chelsea Arsenal today as a rivalry. But I'm going to ask you, I've got 4 on my bucket list global derbies that you'd like to attend on your bucket list, mate. It doesn't matter how many you've got. I've got 4. Possibly could have had 5. I'll read mine out. I think some of yours are similar. I'd definitely like to go to Rangers Celtic at Ibrox. I'd like to go to the Milan derby. I'd like to go to Boca versus River Plate at the Bombonera. I'd like to go to Dortmund Schalke at Signal Iduna. I would also probably like to go to the Rome derby as well. But I'm going to ask a question about when you share a ground. So your Milan derby, your Rome derby in particular. I don't know how it works, right? So you're Inter. You normally have your stand. and it's full of Inter fans, and the away ends over here. But then suddenly you're away at AC. Do you go in the away end? I've not, and same with the Rome derby, Rome Lazio. Is it 50-50? Is it? I don't know how it works. I'd be intrigued on the day to attend one of those and go, all right, because surely if half the stand is into blue and black, and AC are at home and in that area of the stadium, they're gonna cause some damage to the blue and black. I don't know how it works as an away match in a shared stadium.
I think, and I could be wrong, and it might have changed. I'm sure I read years ago, and again, this might have changed, but didn't they treat it as if they meet each other obviously twice, it's the same ground. So for one of the fixtures, it's weighted that it's mostly Inter fans and AC away fans, and then the next one it's mostly AC fans and the Inter fans and the away fans. Do they do it like that? I think they do it like that.
I
Is that how
expect that, but what about the normal distribution? So if you're Inter at home playing Juventus, you've got 85% of the stadium all interrelated. Then suddenly you've got 15% of the stadium, and your direct rivals
yeah.
are in your area. I don't. It feels wrong, but I definitely they're on my list. There's me five. So
Yeah,
as I say,
I have them.
Dortmund, Roma, Milan derby, Buenos Aires derby, Rangers Celtic at Rangers. Have you got anything else to add to that? Actually, I wouldn't mind going to Red Star Partizan if they're still in the same division. I think Partizan have dropped like a stone, to be fair. But just to help out my commercial directors, sort of
I had
welcome really.
I did have um Athletic and Sociedad and Betis and Sevilla, proper clubs where that would be an amazing derby to go to, and you might have a slight fighting chance of maybe getting a ticket for one of them. I'd love
Yeah,
to go to one of those because I really do like, watching those kind of teams. And Celtic Rangers is a given. I'd go to Celtic Park or Ibrox. I really don't care which. River Plate, Boca, Christ, I'd like to be a fly on the wall of that one. Um, I wrote one down and I can't remember which one it was. I had
oh, you
that
said,
many.
did you say
I was
Genoa?
like a
Didn't you say Genoa,
Genoa Sampdoria. I was
Sampdoria?
like a kid in the sweet shop. And I think another one that would really stood out for me was probably Flamengo versus Fluminense, or Corinthians versus Palmeiras in Brazil.
Oh,
They'd be tasty ones. So that's this Corinthians Palmeiras is the Sao Paulo derby, or Flamengo Fluminense is the Rio derby. Massive, massive games. And again, just to experience how the South Americans treat their derbies would be something of absolute joy. I think
yeah.
I'd love to go to those. So um, I also wrote one down, this is the one I wrote down, which is maybe is not some other people would pick. I picked Cologne Gladbach because
Oh,
Cologne
yeah.
fans are astonishing, as we've witnessed, firsthand, mate. And I think that's a really big derby, Gladbach Cologne, and I think that'll be a really
Mm,
good one to go to, just from
good.
an atmosphere, just incredible.
Good shout. Okay, all of those clubs are looking out for the fixtures when the fixtures come out, and that's
Yeah,
why, yes, the rivalries, but the rivalries based on geographical location. So those fans will finish this episode with a little kind of outro, as it were. And what I'll say is those fans who support any other club in that sort of area, so geographically London or wherever it might be, or anyone, Coventry fans might say you're chatting shit because we've got a derby and it's called the M69 derby with Leicester. It's a proper derby, whatever. Let us know if we're wrong. It's hopefully just a conversation piece. It's hopefully
yeah,
just a thought process. And the reason we did it today is because we seem to be in the middle of like derby season, as I say. Sheffield Steel City derby last weekend as we record this. We had Arsenal Spurs last weekend. We got Newcastle playing away at Sunderland in a couple of weeks' time. And then we've got a rivalry game, as I would call it, this afternoon. So, derby or bit of rivalry, you decide. Let us know. Be prepared to contribute and tell us if you've got that right or wrong. And you know what? We're not bent out of shape if you think we're idiots. Please just be nice on that basis. So, thanks again for your support
yeah.
with the podcast. We've had a change of plan for episode 25. We've got something we're going to talk about later on in the series, as it were. We've deflected that a little bit further down the line. We're going to talk about another FIFA and world football disgrace, everything wrong with the modern game, because certain things have happened around the World Cup recently, and we want to keep it topical, so we're going to address that as a separate issue, as a separate podcast on episode 25 next time. All I'd say to you, as ever, is please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share on all your favourite platforms: YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, etc. The numbers are going up really quickly now with a number of episodes that have piqued the interest, and thank you for your support with those. Dom, we'll see you next time on the Half and Half Scarf Football Podcast.
Yeah, cheers, mate. I've really enjoyed this one, and I think this subject for me epitomises the kind of stuff that you would discuss in the pub with, supporters from a club where you're going on an away day, you perhaps walking to the ground and chatting, or you're having a couple of pints in the pub. These are the sort of things that we like on our podcast. And these are the sort of things that, this is me and Nick's opinion, but everyone else might think it couldn't be further from the truth, and this is why. So please do, I'd be really interested to see what people think of our opinions on this, because some we might be on the money, others we might be way off beam. So as supporters of your clubs, let us know what you think. And yeah, I'll see you on the next one, mate. I've loved this and looking forward to the next one. Lots to talk about. See you next time.
Cheers, mate. The next one's 25, quarter of a century, but we'll leave that for
25,
now.
25, quarter of a century. Yay.
Yeah, cheers, Dom.
Thanks, mate.
Stop recording.